So, Seconds Out, delighted to be joined by Lou DiBella for the latest edition of DiBella's Digest. And as we always start, I have to ask Lou, how's your week been?
You know, it's sort of like blending into the one before. I mean, I nothing extraordinary. It's been 95 degrees here. It's like tropical in the New York area. It's been really, really hot. New York City's still a strange place these days, and it's life, buddy. It's the same as it's been. It's the same as it's been.
So we've got two shows this weekend over in the UK. We've got Frank Warren going on Friday evening, and then the launch of Eddie Hearn's Fight Camp, as I'm sure you know, on Saturday night. Do you watch much of the UK action over there? Obviously, you've got Matchroom on DAZN and sometimes Warren's on ESPN.
I sometimes, I mean, not frequently, not so much with the regional stuff, the local belts and the all UK matchups, but there's some stuff I'll watch. Like I'm friendly with James Tennyson and his crew, so I probably will watch that show. I'll watch his fight. But I mean, to be honest, if I part of it right now is I'm likely to watch because I don't have much better to do.
It's true, yeah.
But no, I don't tend to watch every show. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a big fan. I still am a big fan, but I don't really watch every show in the United States either, but certainly not abroad. I'm not watching every show abroad.
The whole Fight Camp concept, the idea of having these shows in a purpose-built structure outside in the Matchroom HQ back garden, has that caught on at all in the US? Has there been much buzz about it, or at least a curiosity?
No one gives a fuck about fights in someone's backyard. No one gives a shit, honestly. No, but I don't think. I mean, look, Eddie's a showman, and I'm sure it probably is getting some buzz in the UK. And the UK is where Eddie knows how to promote and where Eddie's the best, or has proven himself to have a tremendous record of success, and I think he knows who he's fishing to. But over here, I mean, it's not. And to be honest, like we're the kind of, people here are a little bit more jaded. I think, we're going through a rough time. It's like I don't think people particularly give a fuck about seeing, somebody's mansion with a boxing ring in the backyard. But you know what? I said this weeks ago, and I really meant it. I give Eddie some credit for like being creative and, trying to do something that's got some bells and whistles. And I do think, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's likely to play pretty well in the UK,
Yeah, I think it will look good on TV as well, which is all important, of course, at the moment.
Which does make a difference. And some of these shows have looked better than others. And I think that it will be scenic and it will look pretty spectacular on TV in all likelihood. But, got to remember also at 5 o'clock, I mean, right now, boxing's having a problem in prime time with American fighters attracting an audience. It's hard to imagine that on a streaming service at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there's going to be much of an audience over here for UK boxing. But for the hardcore fan, I think some of these shows are good. I think the first show might be a little bit weaker than the next few Eddie's doing. But in terms of the quality of fights and competitiveness, these are not matchups that mean anything in the United States, but they're solid competitive boxing, and I'm sure it's solid competitive boxing that means more in the UK.
You won't be staging shows anytime soon. I don't mean to depress you in any way, but it's a fact you're aware of. If you were going ahead anytime in the next few months, what would you do to distinguish your products from other stuff that you can see on TV? What would be the kind of unique selling points or concepts that you'd think about?
I think a lot of it would relate to just the competitiveness of the matchups. I think it would be heavily in the matchmaking. I think I've learned some tricks and stuff that I don't want to really share right now, but watching the way other people are doing it, if we're going to be in an extended period of time where we're going to, and I'm going to have to, at some point, maybe there is the opportunity to come back with a reduced number of people or with none. I think I've seen some stuff and learned some stuff that I could take a little bit away from the way various people are doing it. Eddie's coming back this weekend. Showtime's coming back this weekend in the States. PBC's coming back on Fox in August. So, you'll get to see how other people are handling it. But I got to be honest, if you're not doing the biggest names, you have to show people warfare. Like people don't want to see a non-competitive matchup. A non-competitive matchup in an empty room is pretty much shit. And you can get away with a mediocre fight with a star in a live room that's going crazy for the A side, but in an empty room, the fight has to speak for itself. And I think it goes to the matchmaking. And I think the way Eddie shows that are coming up are going to be judged, the way Frank's shows are going to be judged. And I think that actually Showtime this weekend, I think, has a pretty competitively in the ring, a very strong set of matchups. And I think that I like the way they're coming back with the show that they're doing. I think it has some significant fights in it.
Talking about mismatches, I have to ask something that's caught a lot of traction in the last week was the one between, you already know what I'm going to ask about, Estrada and Adkins, the female fight that saw, the poor, unfortunate victim dispatched very, very quickly. What
Well,
did you
look, I
make
mean,
of
if
it?
you're gonna put a championship level fighter like Estrada in with a 5-0 fighter, the 5-0 fighter has to have credentials. Not coming out of a state with no regulation where she's an ex dancer married to a promoter who's fought people that aren't really competent. What was scary about it, and no offense to the woman, I respect anyone that gets in the ring. I respect her for taking that challenge, but correct me if I'm wrong, but she didn't look like she had any idea how to defend herself.
No.
I mean, she didn't have a clue. It just looked like pulling a woman off the street. And I think it makes you wonder how she got the 5-0. They must have I've often said to you, Danny, I could get a ham sandwich to 20-0 or 15-0.
Yeah.
And well, someone got that girl to 5-0. Her
Her
husband
husband.
got that girl to 5-0. That's remarkable. That's an unacceptable level of mismatch because it's dangerous. I think that I have my differences with Golden Boy, but Robert Diaz is a very good matchmaker. I think he took responsibility and said, "I fucked up on this one." I think that's more than adequate response. I thought that was the manly, correct response to have him. And it happens in boxing. And sometimes you're looking for a record. You're going to be on television. You're looking for someone who's 5-0. When maybe you should be looking for someone who's got a 500 record but can fight a little bit. But you know what? He took responsibility. I think California said that in 2020 hindsight they would not have approved the match, and then we move on from here and try not to do that in the future. But it doesn't help women's boxing. A match like that doesn't help any form of boxing. But most importantly, from a health and safety standpoint, it's just pure dangerous. A woman that inept fighting a killer like Estrada was just sort of frightening and a little bit sickening to watch. And then celebrating the clips or celebrating the 7-second knockout really pissed me off. Because with all due respect, there are hundreds of female fighters that could have scored a knockout in the first 20 seconds of that fight.
I agree. Going from something that we're not too happy about to a fight that should be far more competitive, and that's between Errol Spence Jr. and Danny Garcia. It's being talked about for the fall. No date yet, but PBC show, presumably a pay-per-view.
I love that fight. I love that fight. I love it.
The long layoff.
I've had the opportunity, by the way, to work with both fighters in the past. I like them. I think they're both tremendously talented fighters. I think Errol's pedigree, overall, his game, his attributes are slightly superior to Danny. But Danny's one of the most underrated guys in boxing. Danny just keeps winning, and Danny Garcia is, in my mind, a terrific fighter. Now factor in an accident going 150 miles an hour in a Ferrari, and this being Spence's first fight back. And that adds all the interest and intrigue for me, because what I would have considered maybe previously to be a 3-1 kind of fight in my mind, in terms of the likely result, somewhere in that neighborhood, 3-1, 4-1, now moves much closer to more of an even money kind of concept. I would still I'm going to assume that Spence is in better shape than many people think, and I would probably still make him a slight favorite, but a slight favorite. And do I think Danny could win? Absolutely. And is it a fight I want to see? Yep. Not only that, it's a fight I'd pay for. So if that one's on pay-per-view, I'm buying.
Do you make Spence bold or foolish for taking on Garcia without a tune-up fight?
He knows how to fight. The issue is not whether he knows how to fight.
No, but testing out his injury
Yeah,
and see how his
but
jaw
even if he's gonna,
responds.
yeah, but you know what? It's not. I mean, he and his doctors know if where he is right now is going to be where he is in a year.
Sure.
So, like, I mean, do I think it's foolish or it should be second guessed if Danny wins? No. You know, Spence was the number one talent, I think, in that division before the accident. He's had significant time off. His doctors and his managers and his crew believe that this is a worthwhile risk. I'm not going to second guess it because, I mean, what would it prove if he went in there with an inferior opponent and won easily? And by the way, what would it prove if he went in there with an inferior opponent and maybe didn't look as impressive as he used to? It wouldn't mean that much either way. I actually think it's exactly the right thing to do. I think he knows in his heart, he feels like he's a favorite to beat Danny Garcia. He knows that Danny Garcia will never be given more of a chance by guys like you and me than right now. I think it's actually an astute business move. I give Spence credit for it. And I think it's a great opportunity for Danny.
If Errol Spence does prevail, add that to the victory over Sean Porter, is he then the number one welterweight based on resume over Terence Crawford?
Yes. Yeah.
Crawford's
Not
obviously...
because Crawford's not great, just because Crawford hasn't had the opportunity to fight the same resume of fighters that Spence has. Particularly if Spence defeats Danny Garcia, that's a big victory. And not only that, I'll go a little farther. He goes into my top 5 pound for pound unequivocally, and maybe, you know, as high as 2 or 3.
Wow.
If he beats Danny. I mean, I really am a fan of Danny Garcia. I think he's a top level welterweight. I think he's a top guy that is somewhat underrated. Same way I think Sean Porter is somewhat underrated. If Spence, coming off that kind of an accident, this kind of a layoff, can get into the ring and beat a Danny Garcia in his first fight coming back, that's, in my mind, a tremendous athletic achievement. So, you know, he's right up there, and then in my mind with Lomachenko and you know, Inoue, and I would put him ahead of Crawford.
If you were a betting man, would you expect us to see Spence versus Crawford before, you know, Spence moves up in weight or the fight becomes unviable?
I think you might see that fight. I think it's possible. I think if Spence beats Garcia, Crawford gets a few more wins. I think it's not out of the question. I mean, you obviously have the different sides of a street problem, but at the same time, you don't have guys with, you know. Look, honestly, Spence has some more alternatives. You know, I mean, there's still Manny Pacquiao out there. There's still there, you know, Crawford being but at some point, Bob Arum and Top Rank are going to they're going to make deals that allow Crawford to fight the top competition. I think that's inevitable. So I expect you could see Spence and Crawford in 2021 at some point. I wonder whether you're going to see Spence and Garcia, honestly, this year. I still wonder, only because I think they're leaving a lot of money on the table, because that's a big gate fight. I think it would do well at the gate. Spence and Garcia have already proven that they can draw. But I'll tell you what, it's a good enough fight that it might be able to, even in a empty room, it might be able to make economic sense, because I would view that, if that gets put onto the calendar, in my mind, it's right there with the first fight I'd want to see on pay-per-view. I mean, Spence and Garcia, I'd like to see Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez, particularly. Those are the two that I'm most excited about for the fall. I think the Charlo doubleheader is good, is also interesting. 2 very, very good fights, and I love Charlo Derevyanchenko, and I like the other fight with his brother also. I also think that, like, we discussed it last week, but I think that's very cool, that idea of doing multiple fights in the afternoon, and your pay-per-view subscription still lasts that night, and you get multiple fights that night. I think that's good bang for the buck.
How do you feel a potential Spence-Crawford showdown compares with some of the welterweight fights of the past, the likes of De La Hoya, Trinidad, and Hearns, Leonard, that kind of thing?
I mean, in terms of God-given ability in the ring, they both have tremendous abilities, so it probably goes into that top category. I don't think Spence is as big a star as as all those other guys you mentioned.
So,
Nor do I think, honestly, if I'm going to be honest, nor do I think at the moment Crawford's as big a star as Spence. So I don't think it's a monumental fight that gets the world's attention, but it's a fight certainly that would have the attention of the hardcore boxing fan everywhere on the planet.
why do you feel Spence is a bigger star than Crawford as it stands? Is it just having fights against that top level competition? Is it some of the stuff outside the ring, like the car crash, for example? Has that helped people know about him a bit more?
Storylines outside of the ring do bring attention to you. I mean, you don't want to have a 150-mile-an-hour crash in a Ferrari to get bigger, but it certainly put a lot of attention on his story and his journey. I think also don't underestimate. I mean, I promoted a lot of those Brooklyn boxing cards and those PBC shows on Fox Network in prime time. And those are very powerful platforms in the States. I mean, you're talking about, multiple times the number of viewers that a normal boxing show gets that's not on network TV in prime time. So, I mean, also, you got to remember, Spence fought the kid from Italy. It's going to take me. What?
Bundu?
Bundu. Thank you.
No worries.
He fought Bundu, and the match was coming right out of the Olympic basketball game.
Okay.
And if you that fight did one of the biggest viewerships in the history of boxing in the United States. It was something like 4 or 5 million, 6 million people watched it. So that's the kind of, like, Crawford's never had that kind of a audience on video ever. So it's just empirical. I'm looking at the data, and he's fought in front of more people. He's fought on bigger shows. He's fought better competition. And you got the TMZs, the national news, the ESPNs, and everyone covering the accident he had in his recovery. And now also you have millions of people that knew he had that traumatic accident wondering how he's going to look in his first fight back. So I think Spence is, look, I'm a big Spence fan, and I think he can, I think at the moment his star shines more brightly than Crawford's. But that could change when, after they fight.
Now, before we let you go, if you were blessed with power from the boxing gods and you could make any fight at the moment in the world, would it be Spence Crawford, or is there another big fight you'd make first?
I mean, I'm a heavyweight fan, and as the heavyweight division goes, so goes boxing. Even though it doesn't involve an American, I probably would first if I could pick a fight and put it in the ring so I could sit there and drink some good scotch on Saturday night and enjoy myself, I probably want to see Fury and AJ. So if I could make any fight, it would probably be that.
That's a good choice.
I'm probably more excited for Spence and Crawford than I would be for Canelo and Triple G again. But I think that I'm a big, and a smaller kind of thing, as I'd like to get the deal done for Junior Fott to fight Joe Parker in New Zealand, because I do think I think for the people in New Zealand that would be a tremendous event, and right now no one can really get in or leave, and it's probably the right time to make that fight. So I want to see that happen on a selfish level. If I was looking for the fight that I think would be the biggest for boxing, I probably would force the issue and see Joshua against Fury. Or let me rephrase that: Fury against Joshua.
Yeah, I thought
the number one guy goes first.
Fair enough.
And until proven otherwise, I have Fury at number one heavyweight.
Yeah, I think most people do at this stage. Brilliant. Well, it's been a pleasure as always.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
I hope next week there's some
good news. I'm not discussing a potential retirement today, or
yeah.
Nothing controversial is going to come out of this conversation.
You won't have all your staff calling you worried about their futures this time.
No, not at this time. All right, buddy. Good seeing you.
Take care. Speak soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.